Today we are welcoming Marika Strano, who graduated a year ago from the University of Foreigners at Perugia in Italy. She is a modern philologist, which gives a cool twist to the ancient stuff there. Other than that, she is working on the reception of myth in Italian, English, and Irish literature from the 19th and 20th century. So over to you, Marika.
Thank you. So here there's the title of my paper, James Joyce's Leopold Bloom and Affirmation in his opposite Homer's Odysseus, when myth becomes a symbol of democracy and tolerance. So can you see I'm moving my slide, can you see it?
I can't see your slides moving.
Yeah.
There it goes.
Okay, so first of all, thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very interesting series of seminars. The title of my paper, as you see, and as I told you, involve both James Joyce and Homer's Odysseus. And in fact, today I would like to talk to you about the reception of the myth in James Joyce, an author I have begun to study in many of his aspects and shadows, and the aim of this paper is to discover, first of all, why he decided to use the myth as a frame for his characters, and then I would like to try why does Joyce decide to use the myth, and in particular Homer's myth, and if are there similarities with his predecessor, and of course if we have differences. So I would like to start my my presentation telling you that Ulysses, in Thomas Elliott's opinion, is a book to which we are all indebted and from which no one of us can escape. But unfortunately, I must contradict Mr. Eliot, because many of us since high school try to avoid Ulysses, especially for his complexity, because it's a very complex, as we were saying, a very complex work. So the Little Review magazine published Ulysses episode from 1918 to 1921, but the first edition of the complete book is from 1922. But the wanderings of Leopold Bloom and his modern Odyssey around Dublin is Italian pronunciation, around Dublin, is set on June 16, 1904. And this date is, of course, not casual, because this is the day of the first date with the woman who would become his wife, James Joyce's wife, so called Nora Barnacle. And what is now called Bloomsday is, I don't know in England and in Galles, in Wales, but in Ireland it is. And this is celebrated all over the world with events that try to retrace Leopold's steps around Dublin. This is a map. I love map, even if I'm a modern philologist. So I know that you classicists love maps. So here we have a map. This is Nabokov's map of Joyce's Ulysses. The structure of Ulysses. The book is divided into 18 episodes, and as you know, we have here the first difference between this work and Iliad and Odyssey, that have 24 episodes. But the structure adopted by Joyce is that of Homer. The book, in fact, presents a subdivision into 3 parts, and we have Thelmiky, Odyssey, and Nostos. So the structure is the same. But what interested me from the first lesson, English literature lesson, were the Homeric titles of this book, because as Richard Ellman said in Joyce and Homer, when Joyce began to serialize Ulysses in the Literary Review, he insisted that Homeric titles be prefixed to the episode. Later, they disappeared, but they remained in his mind if it's not on the paper. And we can see Homeric titles in Linati's scheme of Ulysses, but also in Gibbel's scheme of Ulysses. But why? So James Joyce wrote these schemes because he wanted to help his friend, first Carlo Linati, and then, of course, Gilbert, in understanding the book. Let's say that the scheme is a sort of map to guide Linati, but of course also the reader, in the reconstruction of Leopold Bloom's wanderings in Dublin streets. So in the handout I sent to you, we have, of course, the Homeric titles, as I said before. So, for example, the first episode is Telemachus. The title is Telemachus, and so on. The fourth is Calypso, but we have Lotus Eaters, Hades, and so on. So we in the scheme have also the time. 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and so on. And every episode in Joyce has a color. And this is important because when James Joyce became blind for a glaucoma, for him colors were very, very important, because if he was blind, he used to say, shut your eyes and see, close your eyes to see, to try to understand the world. So Joyce, we are lucky, told us who are the people involved in the episode. This science, for example, the first is theology, but we have, as I told you, Thomas, we have history. We have ancient history, because you have to know that Stephen Dedalus, that is the co-protagonist with Leopold Bloom, said, history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. So we have Stephen's vision of the story, of the history. Because at the beginning of the episode, we have Pyrrhus. We have Stephen Dedalus, the co-protagonist with Leopold Bloom, is a teacher, an history teacher, like you, and he was talking about Pyrrhus, but his students weren't able to answer to the question of their teacher. So later, with the school principal, who says that he was a lover of history and of anthropology. We have anthropology in the second episode of the book. And the principal, Mr. Dizzy, said that he loved history and anthropology only because he collects historical artifacts, but he didn't know history. That's why Stephen said history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. But first of all, because we have William Blake visions of the story, that he said that the story is a human narration, so he doesn't reflect the truth. But what is the most important thing for me right now is that for Stephen Dedalus, history was the nightmare of the contemporaneity. So we have classic history with periods, but contemporaneity in contact, because of course for Stephen Dedalus in 1917 and of course, for James Joyce, the nightmare was the nightmare of the World War I. So that's why it's important, especially, okay, the first, because of course it's Telemachus in search of a father, but the second episode is important because he gives the idea of the history and how classics and modern and contemporaneity could be in contact. So, as I said a moment ago, Ulysses has a tripartite structure. We have Telemachy, Odyssey, and Nostos. In fact, the Odyssey is represented by wanderings of the so-called anti-hero. And I will return to this term in a few seconds. Leopold Bloom, the first character, the main character is Leopold Bloom. But the book begins with Telemachy, right? 3 episodes dedicated to Stephen Dedalus, who I mentioned right now, who Leopold Bloom will adopt and recognize as a son, as his son. So, as I said, Leopold Bloom is defined very often defined as an everyday man. As an anti-hero. But Leopold Bloom is an Irish Jew who at first, and I'm not very careful, I have to be honest, at the first and a very not careful reading of Joyce's masterpiece, embodies all the negative qualities that a hero to be defined as such must not have. He's extravagant, inconclusive, and like James Joyce was a very great drinker. But I have to be honest, I think, and this is my modest opinion, but other scholars say so. It's true. Leopold Bloom embodies all the anti-hero characters, but even his faults are I swear not noble, because in episode 5, Lotus Eaters, after he went to the post office to get a letter from a certain Martha Clifford, and Leopold feels guilty for that letter because he thinks that he's cheating his wife Molly Bloom, that represents the third part of the book, of course, Nostos, because at the end of the day, Leopold Bloom will come back to his wife, but his wife is the real cheater, is the real traitor. And while Leopold Bloom talks with a friend, he tries to pick at a woman's stockings he sees passing across the street. So his faults are very not noble. But Leopold Bloom has very positive, as I will try to tell you later, very positive shades. But what is interesting for me is also why James Joyce choose an everyday man, because James Joyce gets us used to what can be called an everyday man. This Ulysses, more than Homer's Odysseus, seems to resemble the Ulysses we find in Plato's Republic. So between the lines of the Greek philosopher, we find Odysseus who wishes to reincarnate as an ordinary man and not in an Homeric hero. but at the same time, in James Joyce Ulysses, we find also that Odysseus that decided to come back, to Penelope and leave Calypso, even if the nymph decided to offer him the immortality of a god. So Ulysses, Leopold Bloom talks and could be every single man or we know, of course. So well, so to come back to my question, is Leopold Bloom an anti-hero? He repeatedly proves to be a man of great humanity, capable of courtesy, even towards those who want to use it with him. And here there is the example. He, as I said before, decides to not to cheat on his wife, even if he knows that his wife is betraying him, because he discovers the other lover letters, and Molly Bloom is going to cheat him, to cheat Leopold Bloom in his own house. So it's awful, but he decided to be loyal to her, like a hero who is loyal to his homeland in battle. So Joyce's sources, what is important now is to discover if James Joyce had only Homer in his mind, or if he had other authors. And yes, the first of all, and I think the most important with Virgil, is Eugamon of Cyrene's Telegony. So I was very, when I started study Joyce, I couldn't imagine that in James Joyce's work, only in a work, we had Eugamon of Cyrene Telegony, the Aeneid of Virgil, Fenelon's Les Aventures de Télémaque, and three other important authors, so Berard, Butler, and Bacon. Eugamon, let's start with Eugamon. His Ludicrous Telegony is one of the most important sources of Joyce, because evidences of Eugamon of Cyrene's influence can be found in Linati's scheme of 1921, because Joyce, and we know for certain because okay, we know, of course, that Joyce had a study of the lost Telegony in his library, and what interested him particularly was the reiteration in the sequel of the themes as a son searching his father. And Telegonus and Telemachus here are a symbol of the optimistic and pessimistic filial piety. And Joyce was himself a symbol of the optimistic filial piety, since his father, as the writer himself admits, is present in all his works, and especially, and we know about from Ellman, Ulysses is, as Joyce said, is the spitting image of my father, of his father. So Eugamon dispatched Ulysses to the land of Thesprotia, where the hero marries the queen Callidike. In the schema Linati, Joyce indicates that Molly Bloom serves as both Calypso. In fact, we find the name of Calypso, but we find also Callidike, as to combine eugamonic and Homeric treatments. Another important source, as I said before, is the Aeneid of Virgil. Joyce had in his library copies of the Aeneid, both in Latin and in translation, because what we know for certain is that James Joyce couldn't speak and read Greek, but with Latin maybe he could read it and appreciate the Latin, the works in Latin. Virgil, like Joyce after him, changes the order of the episodes, but many of them in somewhat he maintains it, he retains them in a somewhat altered form. Calypso becomes Dido, as we know, and Aeneas descends to the shades not to see his mother as Ulysses did, but like Leopold Bloom in Necktown to see his father. So even Leopold Bloom in Necktown goes to see his father because the figure of the father is constantly present in that work. Aeneas meets in hates an angry Dido. Bloom meets in Church's palace, an hellish place too, all the women about whom he feels guilty. But the principal Virgilian connection, I think, is the Trojan horse, which Homer did not present. So I think that in Ulysses, Virgil is present, especially for this reason, for this episode. Another source, as I wrote also in the slide, is Fenelon's Les Aventures de Télémaque, which has 18 chapters. So maybe this was a source because for the number of the chapters. But in Joyce's library, we find other three important authors: Berard, Butler, and Bacon. And following Berard, Joyce patiently established geographical details and made his poem like Homer's melting pot of races. Following Butler, he saw in the poem an extrapolation of Homer's autobiography for which he could more or less substitute his own. And following Bacon, he found both voyage and voyager to be symbolic. To be the voyage, in fact, the journey, of course, as I will say, is not only the physical journey, but also the journey of a soul. So yeah, this is Samuel Butler's Odyssey map that, yeah, I have to be honest, Samuel Butler's Odyssey take place in near to Trapani, and I am from this zone you see in the image, so it's like to be, it's my personal Odyssey, and this is why I read this and I find interesting this map, so it could be interesting. But the main question for all of us, for me for sure, is why did Joyce use the myth? And I will answer to this question by with Thomas Eliot's words. Mr. Joyce's use of the Odyssey has a great importance. It has the importance of a scientific discovery, because in using the myth, in manipulating a continuous parallel between contemporaneity and antiquity, Mr. Joyce is pursuing a method which others must pursue after him. They will not be imitators any more than the scientists who use the discoveries of Einstein in pursuing his own independent further investigations. It is simply a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy which is contemporary history. So we have, for the first time, Mr. Eliot, of course, talks about the chaos, and then the cosmos, I will explain to you in a few seconds, of modernity. And because for James Joyce, modernity was a nightmare. And we find this idea in history's ideas, as I said before, and what I said about the second episode. According to Ellman, yeah, Ellman is the most important biographer of James Joyce. So his writes, his works are like Bible for Joyceans. So that's why I mention Ellman several times. And according to Ellman, Joyce, by the myth, wanted to invoke the collective past as well as his personal moment, but in part was for Joyce a way, and this is I think the most important thing, a way of aggrandizing his characters and his country, of connecting by continental drift the Ireland, which in a notebook he rudely assailed as an afterthought of Europe with Greece. So this is, I think, I guess, the most important reason, this parallel with Ireland and Greece. But a scribal note in a book of Armagh makes a claim that St. Patrick himself abstained from making in his confessio that he was the grandson of Ulysses now. And we find Ojaija in the title of an early history of Ireland by O'Flaherty. So this could be, I guess, could be interesting for Joyce to, and that's why he used the myth. But James Joyce is not, of course, the first Irish author to use the myth, because we find it also in William Butler Yeats. In fact, he decided to use the myth, but in a very different way from Joyce, because as Jordan Barr this time said in his essay Counterparts, the Iliad and the Genesis of Joyce's mythic method, an important aspect of Celtic twilight literature, so it is an important symbol of the Celtic twilight literature, was the utilization of mythology, in particular of Celtic mythology, to glorify a quasi-historical vision of Ireland's heroic past. Well, the mythic fiction of Irish literary revival often emphasized a violent, epic, and a nationalistic ideal. However, Joyce's mythic method can be understood as anti-violent, anti-epic, and anti-nationalistic. So this I think is important, because James Joyce's works are written in the light of anti-violent and anti-epic. This is important. And as James Joyce's brother Stanislaus wrote about his brother's childhood, he says that when James was asked which hero he wanted to resemble, he replied Ulysses, in reaction against the general admiration for the muscle-bound dealers of Homeric blows. So, as I said before, Joyce doesn't use the myth for the first time in Ulysses, but we find it also in Counterparts. That is a short story, one of the 15 short stories of Dubliners. And even in Counterparts, even in Dubliners, the Iliad, the myth, doesn't present bloody scenes at all. Joyce revisits the first of the Homeric poems in the light of anti-violence. Even the Iliad is visited in this light of anti-violence. And Joyce's transformation of the Iliad in Counterparts can be understood as a direct renunciation of William Butler Yeats and all violent national epics. And here there's the quote, as I said before, even, and we know, of course, thanks to Ellman, Stanislaus Joyce wrote that James Joyce's favorite hero was Ulysses and not Achille or and so on, Hector or and so on. But another question I questioned myself during my master degree was why Leopold Bloom is an Irish Jew. Why Jews are so important for James Joyce. First of all, is for his friendship with Italo Svevo. So Joyce, as I told you, but if I didn't tell you, I'm going to tell you that James Joyce in 1904 left Ireland, left Dublin, and he went to Trieste. And Joyce became here in Italy the English teacher of a large number of Jewish pupils. And among his students, there was an Italian author. I don't know if you ever heard it, but his name was Ettore Schmitz, known as Italo Svevo, and he was from a family which had emigrated, like Leopold Bloom, from Hungary. And Svevo, like Leopold Bloom, married a wife in part Jewish. So we think that Molly Bloom represents the wife of Italo Svevo. But Wandering Jew was also in Joyce's mind in Seuss's version, and Wagner's The Flying Dutchman was in Joyce's mind. But what interests to me is Joyce's lecture in Trieste in 1907, because he cited Valency and Berard, who had made both Greeks and Irish Semitic. So here we have the comparison between Greeks and Irish people. But during a meeting of the Law Students Debating Society, John Taylor made the famous speech in 1991 in which he compared the Hebrews in Egypt to Irish under a foreign domination who have never lost their identity. And the identity, the exile for James Joyce is very important, is a very important thematic. And we know because he wrote Exile, an opera, a work with this title. So it could be important that in Egypt, Hebrews, so this comparison between Hebrews and Irish, let's say so. So Luigi, now yes, I know I'm Italian and I'm Sicilian. First of all, I'm Sicilian and not Italian. And in fact, I will cite Luigi Pirandello. Luigi Pirandello was born in Sicily in 1897. And he said once that I was born in Sicily, and here a man is born an island, on the island, and remain an island until his death, even as he lives far from the harsh native land surrounded by the immense and jealous sea. Now I'm saying so because I don't want to compare, of course, Pirandello with James Joyce, but I think that James Joyce, when he left Dublin in 1904, I think that Dublin will remain always and remained in his mind forever, because all Joyce's works are set in Dublin, and Dublin, I know, he's the capital of the Ireland, and Ireland is an island. So James Joyce abandoning his island became the island too, like Odysseus, far from his own home. And what is important that now for me is that Leopold's peregrinations through Dublin streets don't represent only a physical journey. They are the journey of an exile. And what is more important in this, in fact, is this symbolic level of these wanderings. Because that Odyssey was an allegory of the wanderings of the soul that occurred to Joyce as to many before him. And Joyce, when wrote Ulysses, tells us that Bloom's journeys are the journeys of a soul, of an exiled soul. And in addition to his very important point, this theme at both Ulysses and the Odyssey, Joyce clearly adopt and adapt the Homeric settings and what he chose to consider the prevailing themes. And so we have settings and themes. And he found the Odyssey beautifully all embracing in its vision of human concerns. His own task must be to work out the implications of each incident, like a Homer who had long outlived his time and had learned from all subsequent ages. So we have the concept of the exile both in Ulysses and in Homer's. And the journey of a soul could be, yes, of course, Ulysses, but only Homer's Odyssey. But both the Odyssey and Ulysses seems to have something in common also, as you said before, also from a linguistic point of view. That is, I can imagine, now I am Italian and Italian is my language, but for an Englishman, for an Irish man and woman, has to be very, very nice, very nice, amazing to discover all James Joyce's shadows, linguistic shadows and linguistic point of view. So Joyce, as I said before, yes, in Ulysses, but also in Finnegan's Wake, in unknown English, because if you open the first page of Finnegan's Wake, you discover that if English is your mother language, you will discover that you don't know English at all, because that is not English. And my professor Enrico Terrinoni with Fabio Pedone translated then the Finnegan's Wake in unknown Italian. They called Finn Italian, and they always say that is a Finn English. So it's a known language that seems to express nothing, but at the same time, every single word contains multiple concepts. As I said before my presentation, the first word is river run. So I want to tell you about this word. Is very crazy, strange, weird for me, because river run, okay, is the first word of the book of Finnegan's Wake. River run past Eve and Adams, from swerves of shore to bend of bay, brings us by commodious vehicles of recirculation back to Old Castle and environs. And yes, river run, as I told you, is the course which a river, the Liffey, shake and follows through the landscape. But I don't know if you know Italian, but I will tell you, river run could be riverranno. Our word, Italians have this word, river run, and I feel a weird reading this word, an Italian word, with the English pronunciation. I'm crazy, but river run, river run in Italian means come back, They will come back. It's future. They will come back. They're going to come back. But who? Who is going to come back? Even Adams, or maybe the history. And as I said before, these are Giambattista Vico's corsi e ricorsi storici. So in this river run, Thomas, please, you have to read this Finnegan's Wake, because, as you said, you are you studied history, and in my opinion, this is the history. This word is a symbol of the history that will come back, that events that are going to come back, always be in a different light, but they will come back. So cosmos is another word that we have in Finnegan's Wake. So here I find every person, place, and things in the cosmos of Alle. So chaos, it's not the opposite to the cosmos here. It may seem, of course, chaos and cosmos, the order, but we have these two opposite concepts in only one word. So this cosmos that interposes it with the cosmos and the chaos and the cosmos. So we have also syntactic devices. Joyce, for example, uses the sentence structure to make it Greek. So the first, this time we are in Ulysses. Word syntactic order is used to homerize the sentence. So stately plump Buck Mulligan instead of Buck Mulligan, stately plump. So this could be another homerizing of James Joyce. But I actually love, because okay, I studied modern stuff, but during my high school I studied also Greek and also Latin, and Joyce's epithets. Joyce finds a way to give new life also to numeric epithets, as can be seen on this occasion. We have a dark wine colored to describe, and we have this in Dubliners, not in Ulysses, but in Dubliners, when Joyce talks about a character. But my favorite, I think, is the Snotgreen and Scrotum tightening sea, that Joyce's translator, or Joyce's Italian translator, find very lovely translation for this, also in Italian. That I think it was not so easy at all. Scrotum tightening sea. And at the end we have egg-shaped head, always in Dubliners counterparts. But what is interesting that is how Homer and Joyce use their epithets from totally different purposes, because if those of Homer indicate a quality of the hero that highlights his kalokagatia, in Joyce, on the other hand, they perform an opposite function. They serve to highlight a negative quality, something bad that the character, character personality. Now I want to come back to my first question. Can the myth be a symbol of democracy? As Fritz Sen told me once when we were in Rome at a James Joyce Italian Foundation in Rome annual meeting, when I asked him if there are possible readings, wrong or right possible readings of James Joyce Ulysses, but also Finnegan's Wake, he told me, as he said in the Joyce of Impossibilities, that there is anything wrong in all possible readings, just that none of them can ever be entirely right. So I wish to tell you, to talk you about an anecdote that happened to me. The first time I went to English literature class during my master degree course, I asked my teacher, Enrico Terinoni, that is the translator, as I said before, of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, what answers I could expect to the many questions that Joyce, with his works, had crowded my mind, and what was the right way to read Ulysses. So my teacher replied, like Fritz Sen, that there are no right or wrong interpretation when we read Joyce. There are only possible interpretations. And above all, when I told the same teacher that I at the beginning had very little understanding of Joyce and of Ulysses, he told me that when we read Joyce, understanding little or nothing is something very positive. And I actually went home very, very angry that day, thinking of choosing another course, I have to be honest, because in my opinion, life was very complicated to have a head full of questions that cannot be answered. But after a couple of days, I have to be honest, a couple of days, also free, if I have to be honest with you, another question came to my mind. Why should a literary work provide answers if, like Ulysses, we are the first to ask ourselves infinite questions, and we have the desire to discover infinite and endless spaces. And these are my favorite Italian poet's words, Giacomo Leopardi, that in the infinite will say infinite and endless spaces we have in this reality. As I proceeded for all my presentation, I want to say that Ulysses, I know that the correct pronunciation, I make lots of mistakes, but I know that Ulysses is Ulysses. But another way to write, to write Ulysses is this way, is in the second way, Ulysses, because as my professor say, and I'm on accord with him, Ulysses is about you, but about us, the destiny of us. We are, yes, James Joyce's everyday man and woman, like Leopold Bloom, but we are like Homer's Odysseus, so Ulysses, but we are also like Dante's Ulysses, that he desired to live again and to leave Penelope because his desire to know was too big. Well, now I have to. Okay, yes. Joyce wrote his works at the beginning of 19th, but they, I think, and this is the utility. In Italy, we are discussing a lot about the utility of classics, but not only ancient classics and ancient works, but also of modern, of contemporary classics. And Joyce wrote his works at early 19th, but they are actually is the Odyssey, but also the Aeneid and so on. And this, in my opinion, is the importance of classics. They tell us many things and open up infinite ways of giving a reading to the reality that surrounds us. So words opening new words. And that is where I'm gonna finish with Odyssey 23, because I think that one of the most important think of classics of Odyssey in particular is the recognition of Penelope's and Odysseus suffering, because we know Odyssey seems the poem of Ulysses, but of Odysseus, but it's not. It's also Penelope's poem, and I wanna close with this word, with Homer's words. As Atlantis will come to shipwrecked sailors when out at sea Poseidon has struck their gallant vessel, the sport of tempests and swelling waves. And now a few of them had swum out from the whitening waters to a refuge on shore. Their bodies all encrusted with brine, as will come, as is the dry land to those when they set foot. There will all their miseries behind them. So will come to her was the husband she kept her gaze upon, and her white arms about his neck would not even now let him go. So the suffering and the recognition of a common destiny is for me what we have to search in all our classics. But the last thing I swear, the democracy of a classic, it could be Greek, it could be Latin, it could be Italian, it could be English, Irish, whatever you want. We can see its democracy by the several version and translation of the same masterpiece we have. So there is no right or wrong interpretation, but only possible ways or solution to interpret and translate our work. So different voices that both in Homer, but also in James Joyce, we can give to the same novel or story can open always new things and infinite worlds. So that's why for me a modernist can't absolutely abandon classics, but a classicist have to, in my opinion, open to modernity and contemporaneity. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate that Homer one at the end there.
Yeah, the most important of Ulysses.